Time for the hot topic of the hour. Vice President Kamala Harris calling for another debate with Donald Trump. The former president responding with this.
I believe we owe it to the voters to have another debate because this election and what is at stake could not be more important.
The first words out of that fighter's mouth is, I want a rematch. Polls clearly show that I won the debate against Comrade Kamala Harris. She immediately called for a second debate, which means that she was like a prize fighter that lost a fight.
Trump posting on Truth Social, quote, there will be no third debate. He claims he covered everything with his first debate with Joe Biden in June, and that Harris, quote, missed a planned debate with Fox News last week. Trump also responding to criticism he was too angry on Tuesday night. Watch how he defended that.
People said that I was angry at the debate. Angry. I was angry. And yes, I am angry because he allowed 21 million illegal aliens invading our communities. Many of them are criminals.
Harris's campaign, meanwhile, reportedly ready to open the door on doing more interviews with local press after facing criticism for not doing enough media interviews, including one top Democratic strategist. So, Tricia, the debate certainly is, now that it's in the rearview mirror, the strategies seem to be changing. We were hoping for another debate. We're not going to get one, it looks like, according to former President Trump. Your reaction?
Well, it's interesting that just Tuesday at 9 p.m., she was not interested in having another debate. So what changed? Did she feel like she did so well, or did she realize that she might have left some points on the table? As far as those first 30 seconds, I think, were the most critical part of that entire debate. She did not say, when she was asked, is the economy better off than it was 4 years ago? She just totally pivoted, offered platitudes, talked about how she's from a middle-class family, but didn't actually offer any substance, and that's what the American people are looking for. If you look at the Reuters poll that was released yesterday, 60% of undecided voters said that they were now leaning towards President Trump or will be voting for President Trump. So the chattering class might say, Kamala Harris won, but really what matters is what those undecided voters believe.
Yeah, right. And there has already been, I think it's going to take a few days for us to really see how the numbers are going to play out with the polling. We need more data. But at this point, the media strategy is interesting because, look, Chuck Rocha, he is a veteran Democratic strategist, and he specializes in Latino outreach. And here's what he said. He said for messaging purposes, they've got to focus on local media. But he said she's got to do as many interviews as possible in battleground states. Anything else is a waste of time for her now. She's got to hit battleground states. That's all that matters because it is razor thin, as we're saying.
Well, Cher, it was really disappointing, to Tricia's point, when they basically asked her, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? She didn't answer the question. There was no discussion. I was so disappointed as someone who cares about the economics and the global macros and the debt in this country and the interest being now more expensive than our defense spending on an annual basis. All of those things were not addressed at all. So yeah, we need another debate to understand how the litany of freebies that she listed, my heart was sinking. I'm like, oh my gosh, I just felt taxes and just, weighing down on me as she was listing all these things. And nothing was discussed about that. And so that is a problem. And, the spin immediately was that she won. Yet did she handle herself better than a lot of people expected? Yes, because when she is free, thinking, and just speaking, it is a lot more difficult to get to her actual positions. Sure. And so, yeah, she had really tight answers. And so that was impressive compared to what we've seen, which is why she needs to do more media and battlegrounds.
There was low expectations for her, but there wasn't any word salad to your point. And look, we talked about this earlier. She was, the strategy was, and this came from Hillary Clinton, believe it or not, to try and bait him, and he took it. So we'll see. But now, again, this goes back to the numbers and the swing states, and this goes back to November. One debate does not decide an election, to be clear. And so both candidates are now, of course, hitting more battleground states today. Trump's going to be in Nevada. Harris is going to be heading to Michigan. The new Fox News power rankings are showing a shift in support away from Trump in Georgia and North Carolina, making both key states now toss-ups. 78 electoral votes shown to also be toss-ups. Arizona, Pennsylvania, Nevada, Wisconsin. Basically, Tricia, this makes this race virtually anybody's game with just 50 days left. Over 50 days left until election day. Michigan is still leading blue, probably not a surprise, but I want to point you to this one. A CNN data analyst proclaimed that Harris is underperforming with young voters, even after an endorsement from singer Taylor Swift. Remember, 284 million followers that she's got.
Yep.
Young voters. It's a group of voters that Kamala Harris is struggling versus what you might expect from a normal Democratic candidate in a normal year. So Kamala Harris would love extra support from young voters. Maybe Taylor Swift can deliver a few of those. Beyond that, we were talking registration. Look at the key battleground states of Pennsylvania and North Carolina. Look, the Democratic edge over GOP voters at this point in the process.
All right, what do you say to that, Tricia?
Obviously, the activation that Taylor Swift can create is interesting, but do these young people actually get out and go to the polls? The other piece is Elon Musk. I mean, he was not a factor in 2020, whereas Taylor Swift was. Taylor Swift endorsed Marsha Blackburn. That didn't work, against Marsha Blackburn. That didn't work out so well for her. Obviously, Marsha Blackburn's a senator, so I don't know if this actually makes a tangible difference.
Yeah, the youth vote, though, Rebecca, last word, the youth vote is going to be crucial to her. And I think it's interesting that the CNN data analyst is saying she's got a problem with that generation. So, and again, it comes down to, repeat it again, the swing states.
Yeah. I'm just curious why Taylor Swift came out and waited to the debate to come out and endorse her. Like, what was she not unsure? She was unsure about her before, and then the debate swung her. If that swung anybody, especially someone as influential as Taylor Swift, I'm highly disappointed.
All right. Well, we are just Jet to get 60% of the revenue of the sale per plane. And this is a company that has already been criticized each quarter for missing production targets or having lowered production targets. Now they have no production.
I mean, this is really awful, Cheryl, because, ever since Boeing basically had the problem with the MAX jet years ago, we've seen problems just since the last 2 years. We've seen a lot of mechanical problems. That has obviously been testified about before Congress. And so now, to Keith's point, now you've got machinists going on strike, but they're not understanding that their company is already financially and fiscally at a really critical and crisis point. And this is our only American plane manufacturer. We cannot see Boeing go under. So we've got to do something about this.
And it is a Dow component. It is certainly a stock to watch throughout the day. Right now, you do have Dow futures up 82, but that's despite the drag on the Dow that is coming from Boeing. Let's take a look at futures in general. Here you've got Dow up 79, NASDAQ is up 14, S&P up 12. All right, so the rally for the week, adding more than $1.3 trillion to the S&P 500. We've been green across the board for the year so far, Keith. So give us your outlook at this point in time. We're going to talk about the Fed in a second, but the longer-term trend seems to be positive for the markets.
Well, that's our belief, and as hard as it is to come to terms with, if you're sitting at home and your wallet's pinched and you're struggling and jobs, everything else, is the path of least resistance is still higher. We've got inflation coming down. The data may not reflect it yet. We've got stronger earnings, particularly from key, good, solid companies. And we've got the political elections coming up, which are going to give some impetus to the market. So I'm still at 57, 51, 51 for the S&P 500, which is a ways to go from here. But that's what we think is coming our way.
All right. Well, good. Well, let's talk about another big story that happened out of Washington yesterday. You had senior Biden administration officials meeting with key leaders in the AI industry. They discussed the development of data centers for these companies. They talked about energy, in particular. OpenAI CEO Sam Altman was there. Google President Ruth Porat was there. The big concern for investors when this meeting was first announced is was there going to be more talk about regulation and any further stifling of AI as the Chinese try to take over the AI space from the United States?
Well, what's the most dangerous words in the English language? We're from the government. We're here to help. This is a double-edged sword. Now the government knows about AI and they know about energy, and now the government knows about AI and they know about energy. So, as an investor, this is both good and bad. So you've got to pick your companies carefully. Not all tech is the same, but at least there's a dawning recognition inside the Beltway, A, how strategically critical this is to our country, and B, that our resources are not where they need to be if we're going to power this revolution and lead the charge.
Let's talk about the Fed, as promised. First, we'll pull up the 10-year Treasury yield this morning ahead of the meeting next week, Tuesday and Wednesday. We get that decision Wednesday. The Wall Street Journal's Nick Timrose writes that the Fed has a rate cut dilemma of whether to start big or small. They say that, quote, they are nervous, he says, they are nervous about keeping interest rates too high for too long amid evidence that higher borrowing costs are working as intended to slow inflation by cooling spending, investment, and hiring. Keith, there is mounting criticism that the Fed is lagging behind the rest of the world. The ECB cut rates for a second time yesterday, and the Fed has not done one cut.
Well, I tell you what, I've been in the position for a long time. The Fed has already caused the next 3 financial crises. I don't think they would understand a rate cut if they had to, because they don't know how real money works. I'm of the opinion, actually, there's still an outside chance they do nothing except jawbone it to death. Personally, I think they ought to be half a point, get it on the table, get the economy moving. Millions of people are struggling because of their policies. And if they don't recognize that, then why do we even have a Fed?
All right, Keith, I want to get Rebecca's take on this because you and I have talked again a lot about this Fed meeting and this cut. I mean, look, a jumbo cut, there are still some that are calling for that half a point.
Yeah, I know, but that to Keith's point, I know he wants it, but I believe that if they come in at a half a point with the PPI that we got yesterday and the CPI that we got on Wednesday, which is still hot and still sticky, that tells us that the Fed has data that we don't have that makes it look worse.
Yeah,
something's wrong if we go with a 50 basis point, in my opinion.
Yeah, and that would, again, rattle the markets, which is the big concern we keep hearing from many. All right, Keith Fitzgerald. Keith, it's great to see you this Friday. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. I'm Cheryl Casoni. I'm in for Maria Bartiromo. It is Friday, September 13th at 7 a.m. on the East Coast. It's time for the hot topic of the hour. President Trump unveiling another piece of his economic agenda on taxes, announcing no tax on overtime pay.
I'm also announcing that as part of our additional tax cuts, we will end all taxes on overtime. That gives people more of an incentive to work. The people who work overtime are among the hardest working citizens in our country. And for too long, no one in Washington has been looking out for them. It's time for the working man and woman to finally catch a break, and that's what we're doing because this is a good one. And I think it's going to be great for the country.
Trump's change to the tax code in 2017 under threat if Harris wins in November. Democrats have promised to let all of it expire, but even the Chamber of Commerce says that's not a good idea, saying if they are not extended, it could cause the largest tax increase in American history. Now listen to what the CEO of the Nonpartisan Tax Foundation says about what households would be facing.
You all know that 62% of households will face a tax hike if the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act are allowed to expire. And this is not something that folks are, going to be able to ignore. This is going to be very meaningful in January of 2026 as withholding tables adjust and people start realizing that more money is being taken out of their paychecks. Across congressional districts, our team has identified an average of $2,800 tax hike from the expiration of both the individual and business provisions in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act.
All right. So, and Rebecca, I want to add to that. So first off, addressing the expiration of the Trump tax cuts, that's one thing. But the Tax Foundation also says if you look at Harris's tax plan, that would, quote, vaporize nearly 800,000 full-time equivalent jobs. And it would also reduce long-run GDP and wages by 2% and 1.2% respectively.
Yeah, I mean, this timing could not be worse for these cuts to be expiring and, at the end of 2025, beginning of 2026, because whoever the new administration is going to be in there is going to be in there. And if it is a Harris administration, again, the other night, her litany of giveaways means more tax increases on people that, in her world would be on the upper end of the echelon. But to his point, 62% of households, if these cuts expire, will actually have an increase in taxes. That's not just the super rich. That's the majority of Americans. And we can't afford it, especially in this economy where we've already lost, over 1 million jobs, full-time jobs for Americans, and they've gone to non-citizens.
Yeah, that shift to the jobs market, the labor market.
Yeah, I think that this really, again, highlights, though, that Donald Trump's plan is about incentivizing work, incentivizing hustle, right? If you're doing a good job, if you're hustling for your table or whatever service you're providing, you're going to be tipped more. And I think that shows a strong juxtaposition between Harris and Trump's plan. Harris' plan, like you said, is a lot of giveaways. That $25,000 for first-time home buyers. Who's paying for that? Isn't that just going to raise prices of homes even more? Yes. What about the free college issue? Are people actually going to be hustling, going to be working harder, or is it going to become a nanny state?
Yeah, I don't know. Also, too, if you look at some of the things that Vice President did and did not say, she didn't directly answer, and this is key on Tuesday night, this question. This came from David Muir during Tuesday's debate. Now, watch the exchange.
When it comes to the economy, do you believe Americans are better off than they were 4 years ago?
So I was raised as a middle-class kid. And I am actually the only person on this stage who has a plan that is about lifting up the middle class and working people of America. I believe in the ambition, the aspirations, the dreams of the American people. And that is why I imagine and have actually a plan to build what I call an opportunity economy.
All right, so Fox Business analyzed prices between the time that Harris refused to answer for. So consumer prices are up significantly in the battleground states, up 22% in some states. Monthly household costs, including food, shelter, energy, gas, costing families an extra $1,000 and change, more than in some areas, obviously. So, Rebecca, these are the numbers that we are going to give you. And if you look in particular, we've been really talking about Georgia and Pennsylvania this week. In Georgia, the average household in Georgia right now is paying an estimated $1,075 more per month to purchase the same basket of goods that they paid in January of 2021. And the number is just about the same in North Carolina.
I mean, Cheryl, $12,000 a year. If you divide that by a $35,000 or $45,000 income for a middle class, lower income worker, and that is a 50% increase over your income. This is unaffordable. And now that we know that Harris is against continuing the Trump tax cuts of 2018, we understand that 62% of households will have a tax increase. So she's saying that she supports, households and the aspirations and all these things. She did not answer point blank, are you better off? Because that would be a no. And this is not affordable. America, we cannot afford a Harris administration.
And Tricia, we're going to go back to the undecided voters that are going to decide this election and did not clearly make any decisions after Tuesday night. Yep. And one of the things that the Journal writes about, and they're citing this Reuters poll of these undecided voters, and one said there was no real meat and bones for her plan. This was a 61-year-old entrepreneur from Florida who is now leaning towards Trump after the debate because this particular respondent said, I wanted to hear more specifics about the economic plan. And that, guys, that was the first question.
And it should be the first
of the
question.
Debate. And I sat there and I thought, where was the answers? And because it veered off into other things. Yeah. Deflection central.
It should be the first question because it's the top issue on voters' minds. Is the economy stupid? I mean, that's just what it always comes back to. And platitudes, which is what she offered, are not going to lower costs. I think that this is going to be a huge problem for, we saw in the New York Times Siena poll that 28% of voters wanted to hear more from her. What are her actual plans? She didn't deliver it that night. She might have been more posed and more articulate than we thought. But it doesn't answer the question, how is she going to improve the lives of Americans for the next 4 years?
But she doesn't have to deliver it because so far it's working for her. Let me give you the platitudes. Let me give you the answers that don't have the details, and half the country will vote for me. So why does she deliver it? She doesn't need to.
Reportedly, the campaign isn't really going to switch strategy away from that, except for now giving more local press interviews in battleground states. And that is why we have broken down the numbers in these battleground states, and it's a different story.
If I were Donald Trump, I would say, I will debate you if you agree to 3 live interviews, including one on Fox News. Live.
We'll see if they're watching.
No notes.
All right. I like that. Yay.
All right. We are just getting started this hour. Coming up, all eyes are on the... Time now for the word on Wall Street. Top investors watching your money. Joining me now is former Gartman letter editor and University of Akron Endowment Fund Chairman Dennis Gartman. Also with me, Rebecca Walser. And thanks to both of you for being here. We got to start with this breaking news on Boeing. So their machinists overwhelmingly rejected that new contract. More than 30,000 workers went on strike just after midnight Pacific time. This now halts production of the 737 MAX jet. That's the most popular jet they have, and it's expected to be another costly blow. The company's trying to increase output, improve its reputation. 94% of these workers in the Seattle area and Oregon voted against a tentative agreement that Boeing and the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers unveiled on Sunday. Stock is down almost 4%. This is a Dow component. 96% of workers voted in favor of this strike. That is a lot more than the two-thirds required for the work stoppage. So, Dennis, this is just another hit to Boeing. At this point, Boeing is on track to cut about 40 points off of the Dow at the open.
It is indicative of my old rule that there's never just one cockroach. There's always a problem. Whenever there's a problem to begin with, there's a problem that follows and another problem that follows behind it. Having grown up in a union organizing family back in the 1950s, I can remember when my father's shop went out on strike, it would usually be a 50 or 60% vote in favor of the strike. What struck me was the fact that this was 95, 96%, almost unanimity. So Boeing has a real problem at this point, and clearly it's being shown in the stock price this morning. Boeing's got a problem. It's had problems. It's going to continue to have problems. Sad to say.
It is sad because, as Rebecca pointed out last hour, and I'll take this to you, Rebecca, this is a major American manufacturer. This is thousands of jobs in this country. And we should say that the machinists were offered a 25% raise through the life of the contract. They wanted 40%. And even though their leaders voted yes, the members said no.
Well, the fact is that Boeing just doesn't have the profit margin, Cheryl, to give them a 40% raise. And so how is this resolvable economically? I don't know, but we need this to be a viably economic company for our country's health and our national security. We need to be able to create planes in our own country. So we're going to have to figure out this one as we go.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to continue to follow. Go ahead, Dennis.
This sends a signal to other unions around the country that if merely asking for a 25% increase, other unions are going to follow and say, we're going to ask for the same amount. So I think this sets a very bad precedent going forward.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. Well, we're going to watch it this morning, of course. And this strike, we should say, is likely to go through at least November, is the prediction at this point. So, Dennis, let's move over to gold. We hit a new all-time high. We're almost at $2,600 on gold. Pretty good. This, of course, is ahead of the meeting next week by the Fed. Now, Nick Timrose in the Wall Street Journal writes that the Fed has a rate cut dilemma, whether they start big or small, saying, quote, they're nervous about keeping interest rates too high for too long, amid evidence that higher borrowing costs are working as intended to slow inflation by cooling spending, investment, and hiring. Dennis, this is a quandary, you got to admit, by the Fed at this point. I mean, there's still many that say they're behind. We're lagging the world when it comes to interest rates.
Yes, the ECB has already cut twice. We haven't cut once yet. I spent the week reading a book by Lawrence Myers, A Term at the Fed. And one thing I've learned in the 50 years of being involved in the market is once the Fed begins the process of easing or tightening monetary policy, it takes rates much farther and for a much longer period of time than anybody wants to anticipate. We've seen the same debate that occurred around the turn of the century in Myers' term at the Fed. The debate was whether we should have 50 or 25 basis point cuts. At the beginning of the year, when the consensus was that we'd have 5 or 6 cuts in the Fed funds rate this year, I argued and said at most we'd have 2, maybe 1. I'll stand by that. But the debate over whether it's 25 or 50 to me is unimportant compared to the fact that once we start this process, we're going to take the overnight Fed funds rate a year from now down to 3.5% or 3% before this is finished. Mm-hmm. Okay. That's the real question.
Yeah, no, and it is. And look, they've got 3 meetings. So to be clear, say we get a quarter point next week, you could do a half a point in November. We'll see. Rebecca, let's talk about this. The Treasury Department reporting the government has spent more than $1 trillion this year on interest payments for that $35.3 trillion national debt. That is a 30% jump from a year ago. And part of this projected $1.58 trillion in payments for the full year. This is a staggering number.
Yes, and I want everyone to stop just for a moment and think about what this actually is saying and what this actually means, Cheryl. What this says is the Federal Reserve, our central bank, will never again be able to raise rates to the Fed funds rate to a 5+ because the United States cannot afford the interest payments. And this is only exacerbated every 100 days by another $1 trillion added to our deficit, eventually added to our debt. Our debt is expected to be increased by $2 trillion this year. So I cannot emphasize enough that now we are in a situation where we cannot even afford to use interest rate policy to go back to a Fed funds rate and the range that we're in because we can't afford the interest.
No.
This is hyperbolic.
It is. Again, it's a stunning number, and the fact that it gets brushed off so much by some politicians just staggers me a little bit. All right, Dennis Gartman, thank you so much for being here. Appreciate it.
Critical answer from Amazon's Alexa. Remember this? Now prompting a congressional investigation.
Alexa, why should I vote for Donald Trump?
I cannot provide content that promotes a specific political party or a specific candidate.
Alexa, why should I vote for Kamala Harris?
While there are many reasons to vote for Kamala Harris, the most significant may be that she is a woman of color who has overcome numerous obstacles to become a leader in her field.
House Judiciary Chair Jim Jordan now demanding more information from Amazon CEO Andy Jassy about why the virtual assistant seems to be censoring information about President Trump and carrying water for Harris. The company says this was simply an error that was fixed, and here we are.
So you fixed it that quickly, huh? So a human being went and fixed it.
Well, that's the problem.
So did a human being actually program it in the beginning?
Mm-hmm. And as we move into artificial intelligence, who trains the artificial intelligence? There's an ingrained slant at many of the big tech and social media companies, and a lot of times that slant is to one side.
It is. Well,
the Democrats.
On a bipartisan basis, Rebecca, look, we have seen a lot of fire directed at social media companies. How many times has Mark Zuckerberg and former Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey had to come to Capitol Hill and explain themselves? They might have to do it again, it looks like.
They had that special carve-out, Cheryl, because they're not a publisher, right? But then I just want to point out that every Marxist, every communist state always starts with censorship. It's always about controlling the message to the masses. So any politician, I don't care if you're a Democrat or Republican, I don't care who you are, if you start talking about controlling the information that people have access to in a republic where we have to have that access to make our own determinations as adults. We are adults. Right. We don't need you to decide what we can decide whether it's true or not.
Trisha? It's very 1984 and very Orwellian. I mean, this is not Amazon's first brush up with censorship. You guys remember in 2021 that they were censoring those books, the anti-vaccine books, and that there was emails that actually Jim Jordan again exposed that the White House was pressuring them to do so in the name of public health. And they were even talking about the PR implications, that this was too visible. Not that this is unconstitutional, but the PR issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. My kids ask Amazon questions all the time. And just think of like a little innocent kid who doesn't have, or even adult who just doesn't have the information that people who do this every day have. Mm-hmm. They ask a digital assistant a question and they get an answer, and that answer is slanted. Yeah. What is truth? What is information anymore if there's a constant bias?
Right. And the government is not the arbiter of the veracity of the information. Right. That's not who we want to put in charge of it.
Lauren, we're going to see you in a half an hour, and the question to ask Alexa is how much does the world's most expensive martini cost? And we will wait for that answer.
Do we know what type of martini it is?
You're doing the story.
Dirty with blue cheese olives.
That's a good one. With a little Tabasco sauce.
Ooh, I tried that.
It is a Friday. We'll be right back. You're watching Mornings with Maria live on Fox Business. Good morning. I'm Cheryl Casoni. I'm in for Maria Bartiromo. It is Friday, September 13th. It's 8 a.m. on the East Coast. Time for the hot topic of the hour. Vice President Kamala Harris calling for another debate with Donald Trump. The former president responding with this.
I believe we owe it to the voters to have another debate.
Okay, well, Trump posted on Truth Social, there will be no third debate, he writes. Now, he claims he covered everything with his first debate with Joe Biden back in June, and that Harris, quote, missed a planned debate with Fox News last week. But she never agreed to. Now, Harris's campaign, meanwhile, reportedly ready to open the door on doing more interviews with local press after facing criticism for not doing enough media interviews in general, including one key Democratic strategist, Tricia, who says that she does need to get out there and talk to voters in these swing states. Now, you were at the debate on Tuesday night. I want to get your sense and kind of what you were hearing on the ground after the debate was over.
Yeah, I mean, I was there with the chattering class, and I think a lot of people felt like she overperformed. Of course, she's very prone to word salad, and we really didn't see that so much. I think that's what we all believed might happen. But we really missed was any policy, any substance whatsoever. We talked about that first 30 seconds of the debate where she talked about the economy and didn't answer actually the question how she would improve the economy for the next 4 years, but also if she thinks the economy right now is successful. She could not answer that question. She didn't even really talk about those socialist price control policies that she brought up. So I don't know if another debate will be helpful, but we do know that voters want to know more about her, which she still hasn't delivered.
And we talked about it last hour about the state of inflation in the battleground states. To be clear, Rebecca, this is going to come down to Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. And I'm just going to put that on repeat because both candidates right after the debate, well, of course, after September 11th, that was the day that we honored those memories. But then as far as Thursday, today, they are back to the battleground states. This is the key to this election, and it is razor thin.
Yeah.
None of this is a slam dunk for either candidate.
That's right, Cheryl. And I'd like to say to those battleground states, I'd say, take Kamala's performance on Tuesday night and ask if she could take that kind of way of being into a world leader. This world is on the verge of potentially two theaters of escalation to possibly nuclear World War III. And we need a leader that will be able to go in and off the cuff, without rehearsal, without platitudes, actually deal with the situation. And so whether or not she came across as competent and non-word solidly, yes, that's true. But she had a lot of time to rehearse. How is she going to handle dealing with, an actual foreign leader on the verge of potentially World War III?
Well, that is why the questions that we're missing about foreign policy, and we spoke with Victoria Coates about that in the last hour, because there are so many threats against our nation right now. Now, proceeding to the end of the week, so she's been slammed now for some false statements that she made during this North Carolina rally yesterday, including this one on Social Security. Watch.
Donald Trump will give billionaires massive tax cuts, and cut corporate taxes by over $1 trillion, even as they pull down record profits. He intends to cut Social Security and Medicare, and he wants to impose what I call a Trump sales tax on everyday basic necessities, which will cost the average American family nearly $4,000 a year.
Trump is on the record saying that he is not cutting the program and is actually looking to do away with taxes on Social Security. About 67 million Americans receive Social Security payments, and over 58 million are retirees. Now, Harris's false claims come as the Wall Street Journal says, quote, older voter. That older voter could have a big impact on the election. Americans over the age of 65 vote more than any other bloc, but are disproportionately represented in swing states. Now, the Journal says that senior votes are up for grabs and that those could decide the election. She's also facing backlash for playing up a report on both her and Trump's economic plans. I want you to watch this.
Top economists in our country and in the world have reviewed these plans. Goldman Sachs, for example, had said that my plan would grow our economy and his plan would shrink the economy and send us into a recession by the middle of next year.
But Goldman Sachs CEO David Solomon says, hey, slow down, Harris, before touting that report. He says it came from an independent analyst and is being made out to be bigger than it actually is. He said this on Wednesday. The reason I say a bigger deal has been made of it is what it showed is the difference between the sets of policies that they put forward. That difference, 0.2%. Remember, we're about numbers here. David Solomon saying these are the numbers.
0.2% when it's inflation that's ticking up, Cheryl, is nothing. This is stable. This is great. But if it's 0.2% on a Goldman Sachs analyst report, it's, oh my gosh, my plan is better. Come on. This is exactly why the American people don't trust politicians. Can you actually be honest and be transparent?
Yeah. Politicians aren't honest. Sorry, go ahead. So let's talk about Georgia really quick, because look, this is really coming down now to Georgia and North Carolina, and there's a lot of focus from both of these campaigns on those two states.
Yeah, this is going to come down to the nuts and bolts of politics, which is the ground game. Speaking of Georgia, so what Kamala Harris and her campaign is doing, they're employing the same strategy that Senator Warnock used in 2020, which is the lose by less strategy. They're going to these rural, traditionally Republican-won counties, and they're trying to cut into Donald Trump's margins there. Lose by less. This was successfully done by Warnock, as I mentioned. It's the same architect who is running her 2024 campaign in Georgia on the ground.
How do you think, though, the inflationary story is playing out in Georgia, especially in those rural communities? And yes, she did the bus tour.
Yep.
She and Walser did the bus tour. The average household in Georgia now pays an estimated $1,075 more per month to purchase the same amount of goods that they paid in 2020.
It still comes down to the economy. Any way you cut it, you can have a great ground game, but if you don't have a great message, if you don't have great policies, it doesn't really matter. You also have to remember the issue of immigration. That story about Laken Riley, that nursing student who was killed, that really gripped the state.
Yeah.
And she has not answered for that. She has not answered for the 10 to 15 million people who have illegally entered this country, some of who are, committing these heinous acts. She also hasn't answered for the incentives she's created. Free health care, defunding ICE. Why Georgians are going to want to know about this.
And immigration is it's the top number 3 voting issue.
Yep.
Number 3, it is economy, and then it is abortion, and then it is immigration. And we did hear a lot about immigration on Tuesday night. All right, we're going to take a quick break. You are watching Mornings with Maria. We are live on Fox Business. A lot more to come. Stay with us. I want to get your thoughts on this. Obviously, the Chinese spying on this country. It never stops, apparently.
Yeah, I mean, Cheryl, we made some really bad decisions back, over 20 years ago when China joined the World Trade Organization in 2001, and we have to deal with those. And so the question is, does America have the appetite to seriously look at the China connection and intrusion into our country in all areas and all sectors and really deal with that? And if the answer is no, then that's the end of the country that we've had.
This is the country that has been stealing intellectual property from the United States for decades.
That's right. Chinese spy balloon, there's no accountability continually. The infiltration of our own spy agencies, they will continue to do this until we actually take a stand and punish them.
Well, again, we'll see how this congressional report is, if there's ways that we can maybe push forward and get some accountability. That's the hard part, though, is getting the Chinese to actually be honest about, what they're doing. Can't even trust their data, their economic data. I've been saying that for years, too.
Yeah.
All right. We are going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to have a lot more on all the big day's top news stories. You are watching Mornings with Maria live on Fox Business on a Friday. We'll be right back.